The people we ignore the fastest are sometimes the ones holding the truth that can bury us. Rain pressed softly against the tall glass windows of Bellamy House, Manhattan's oldest private dining club, where billionaires spoke in whispers and waitresses learned how to become invisible. Claire Whitmore moved quietly between marble tables with a silver tray balanced perfectly in one hand, her black uniform crisp despite the 12-hour shift already weighing on her shoulders. Crystal glasses clinked beneath golden chandeliers. Expensive watches flashed beneath warm light. Somewhere near the fireplace, a senator laughed too loudly at a joke nobody else found funny. Claire kept her eyes lowered. That was the rule here. The less important people seemed, the more comfortable, powerful men became. Table 12 needs another bottle of Bordeaux. The floor manager snapped as he passed her. And move faster. Mr. Calloway hates waiting. Claire nodded once. Calm. Silent. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tray, but her face never changed. Across the dining hall, Ethan Calloway sat at the center of the room like gravity itself had chosen him personally. 38 years old. Sharp jaw. Tailored charcoal suit. A silver Patek Philippe resting against his wrist like a crown disguised as a watch. Men twice his age leaned toward him when he spoke. Women smiled before he even looked at them. CEO of Calloway Holdings. Future chairman. The newspapers called him the Prince of Manhattan Finance. Claire approached his table with practiced grace. Your Bordeaux, sir. Ethan barely glanced up from the documents spread across the white linen tablecloth. Leave it. His voice was flat. Distracted. Claire reached forward carefully, but at that exact moment another server brushed past behind her. The tray shifted. Just slightly. A thin ribbon of dark red wine splashed across the edge of the table and onto Ethan's sleeve. Silence. Tiny. Dangerous. The entire table froze. Ethan slowly looked down at the stain spreading across the cuff of his white shirt. Then his eyes lifted toward Claire for the first time all night. Cold blue. Controlled irritation. Do you have any idea how much this suit costs? Around the table, nervous laughter flickered and disappeared. Claire grabbed a clean napkin immediately. I'm very sorry, sir. Ethan stood slowly, wiping his cuff once before handing the napkin back untouched. Sorry doesn't remove stains. His tone remained calm, which somehow made it worse. Claire lowered her eyes. I understand. He studied her for a moment, almost expecting fear. Instead, she simply stood there quietly, her breathing even, her posture straight despite the attention now turning toward them from nearby tables. Ethan noticed it immediately. Most people apologized to him with panic in their voices. This woman sounded almost steady. Some people, Ethan said as he adjusted his cufflinks, were born to stay invisible. Try not to make that difficult. The words landed softly, but the table went silent anyway. Claire's fingers tightened around the tray again, barely noticeable. Then she nodded once. Yes, sir. She turned to leave when another voice suddenly entered the room. Older. Slower. That's enough, Ethan. Every head turned instantly. William Calloway stood near the entrance beside his private assistant, one hand resting on a polished cane. Even at 76, the chairman carried a presence that quieted rooms without effort. His silver hair was combed perfectly back. Navy overcoat. Gray scarf. The old lion of Wall Street. Ethan straightened immediately. Grandfather, I thought you canceled tonight. William ignored the question completely. His eyes had already settled on Claire. Not casually. Not politely. He stared at her with the strange stillness of someone hearing a voice from another lifetime. Claire stopped walking. For the first time all evening, uncertainty flickered across her face. Tiny. Almost invisible. William took a slow step closer. What's your name? The room remained silent. Claire hesitated. Claire Whitmore, sir. Something changed in William's expression. Not shock exactly. More like pain remembering where it left its keys. Ethan noticed it immediately. Grandfather? William still looked only at Claire. Whitmore, he repeated softly. That's your mother's name too, isn't it? Claire's breath caught for half a second, then disappeared again behind professionalism. Yes, sir. Ethan frowned. You know her? William did not answer. Instead, he looked down at Claire's hands gripping the silver tray, then toward the piano sitting untouched near the far wall of the restaurant. Rain tapped gently against the windows again. The old chairman smiled faintly, sadness hidden beneath it. Your mother used to play Chopin when she was nervous, he said quietly, especially when it rained. Claire went completely still. The tray nearly slipped from her fingers this time. Ethan looked between them both, confused now. What is this? William finally turned toward his grandson. A reminder, he said softly, that uniforms rarely tell the whole story. Then he looked back at Claire one final time. Good evening, Miss Whitmore. Claire lowered her eyes carefully. Good evening, Mr. Calloway. William walked past her toward the private dining room without another word. But Ethan remained standing beside the table, watching Claire differently now. The waitress he had ignored 10 minutes earlier suddenly felt less ordinary, less explainable. And somewhere beneath the warm restaurant lights, Claire Whitmore quietly picked up the wine-stained napkin Ethan had discarded and carried it away like someone already used to cleaning up the mess powerful men leave behind. The dining hall slowly found its voice again after William Calloway disappeared behind the private walnut doors of the chairman's room. But something invisible had already shifted beneath the warm, golden lights of Bellamy House. Conversations resumed in careful tones. Crystal glasses touched again. Forks scraped gently against porcelain plates worth more than most people's monthly rent. Yet Ethan Calloway barely heard any of it. His eyes remained fixed on Claire Whitmore as she crossed the room carrying another tray with the same quiet composure she had worn before the accident, before the strange exchange with his grandfather, before that unsettling moment when William Calloway looked at a waitress like she belonged to a forgotten chapter of his life. Ethan sat back down slowly. One of the investors beside him leaned closer. Who exactly is she? Ethan loosened the cuff stained by wine and took a sip of water instead of answering. Because the truth was simple. He did not know, and Ethan Calloway hated not knowing things. Across the restaurant, Claire moved through tables with controlled precision. Another sparkling water for table 6, the floor manager whispered urgently as he passed. Claire nodded immediately. Of course. Her voice remained soft, professional, almost detached. But inside, her pulse had not slowed since William spoke her mother's name. She had spent years making sure nobody connected those pieces together. Different neighborhoods, different schools, different jobs. Silence was safer that way, especially around powerful families, especially around the Calloways. Claire entered the service hallway near the kitchen, finally allowing herself one slow breath. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly. Somewhere behind the swinging doors, cooks shouted over sizzling pans and steaming grills. She placed 2 champagne glasses onto the counter carefully before gripping the edge of the sink for just a second. You look pale. Claire turned quickly. Margaret Ellis stood beside the coffee station, holding a stack of folded linens. At 63 years old, Margaret had worked at Bellamy House longer than almost anyone alive could remember. She noticed everything. I am fine, Claire replied. Margaret raised one eyebrow. That old man looked at you like he had seen a ghost. Claire forced a small smile. Rich people are strange. Margaret laughed softly. No, honey. Rich people are predictable. That is why they stay rich. Claire looked away quietly. Before she could answer, the kitchen doors swung open again. Claire, the manager barked. Chairman's room. They requested you personally. The tray in Claire's hands almost slipped again. Ethan watched her disappear toward the private dining hall with growing curiosity. William never requested specific staff. Ever. Excuse me. Ethan muttered suddenly, standing from the table before anyone could stop him. He crossed the restaurant slowly, adjusting his suit jacket as he approached the hallway leading toward the chairman's room. The thick carpet softened his footsteps. Halfway there, he stopped near the partially open door. William sat alone at the long private table beneath dim amber light. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood and old books. Claire stood across from him holding a silver coffee pot, her posture respectful but tense. William looked older here somehow, smaller beneath the shadows. How is your mother? He asked quietly. Claire's fingers tightened around the coffee handle. She is doing better. Still playing? Claire hesitated. Sometimes. William nodded slowly, eyes drifting toward the rain sliding down the tall windows. Your mother used to play piano in this building after closing time, long before you were born. Ethan frowned from outside the doorway. Piano? Claire lowered her gaze. I know. William studied her carefully now. Does she know you work here? A tiny pause. No, the old chairman smiled sadly at that answer. Just like her. Claire finally looked at him directly for the first time. You should not have said my name out there. William's expression softened immediately. I know. The silence between them felt old. Not awkward. Not formal. Familiar. Ethan could feel it even from outside the room, and somehow that bothered him more than it should have. William reached slowly into the inside pocket of his coat and removed a folded ivory envelope sealed with dark blue wax. He rested it gently on the table. "Take this." Claire stared at the envelope but did not move. "What is it?" "Something I should have given your mother years ago." "I cannot accept that." William's eyes sharpened slightly. "Claire." The room fell still again. Rain tapping softly against glass. Distant piano music drifting from the restaurant speakers outside. Finally, Claire stepped forward and picked up the envelope carefully, like touching something fragile enough to break memories apart. Ethan leaned slightly closer toward the doorway without realizing it. Then William spoke again, quieter this time. "He reminds me of his father more every year." Claire glanced toward the hallway instinctively, and Ethan stepped back immediately before she could see him standing there. His jaw tightened. His father had been dead for 15 years. William almost never mentioned him. Ethan walked back toward the dining hall slowly, confusion settling heavier with every step. Behind him, inside the private room, William Calloway looked at Claire Whitmore with tired eyes and whispered something so softly Ethan could not hear it. But Claire's face changed instantly afterward. Not fear, not surprise, something sadder, like a person hearing the truth arrive too late. By 11:30 that night, Bellamy House had become quieter in the way expensive places often did after midnight. The loud confidence faded first, then the fake laughter, then the business smiles polished over decades of negotiation dinners and silent betrayals. What remained was softer, the sound of silverware being wrapped in linen, chairs sliding gently across dark hardwood floors, rain whispering against Manhattan windows like a secret nobody wanted to hear clearly. Claire Whitmore stood alone behind the service counter polishing wine glasses one careful circle at a time. The ivory envelope remained hidden inside her coat pocket, untouched since William Calloway placed it into her hands. She could still hear his final words echoing inside her mind. Some promises survive longer than people do. She had not opened the envelope. Not yet, because deep down, Claire already understood something dangerous lived inside it. Across the restaurant, Ethan Calloway sat alone at table 12 long after his investors had left. His untouched bourbon reflected amber light beneath the chandelier, while his fingers tapped slowly against the crystal glass. He was supposed to leave an hour ago. Instead, he kept watching Claire move quietly through the emptying room like a puzzle refusing to solve itself. Every instinct told him something about tonight was wrong. William never discussed personal matters publicly. He never spoke emotionally. He certainly never looked at strangers the way he looked at Claire Whitmore. Ethan finally stood and buttoned his suit jacket. As he approached the service station, Claire noticed him immediately but kept polishing the glass without speaking. "You know my grandfather," Ethan said calmly. Claire placed the glass down carefully before answering. "I served him dinner." "That is not what I meant." Silence settled between them for a second. Ethan leaned one hand against the marble counter. "He knew your mother." Claire nodded once. "A long time ago." "How long?" "Before I was born." Ethan studied her face carefully now. No fear, no nervousness, just restraint, like someone constantly measuring how much truth the room deserved. "And you never thought to mention that." Claire looked at him evenly. "You never asked." That answer almost made Ethan smile despite himself. Almost. "My grandfather does not remember half the names in his own board meetings," Ethan said quietly. "But tonight he remembered your mother playing Chopin during rainstorms." Claire lowered her eyes briefly. "Some memories stay loud." Ethan watched her fingers return to the wine glass. Slow, steady, elegant, not the hands of someone careless or ordinary. He noticed that now too. "Who exactly are you, Claire?" The question hung softly in the warm air between them. Claire looked toward the tall windows instead of answering. Taxi lights blurred through rain outside. New York moving endlessly while secrets stayed still. "Just a waitress," she said finally. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly because both of them knew that was no longer believable. Before he could respond, the restaurant doors opened sharply. Cold air swept inside with a man in a dark overcoat carrying a black umbrella dripping rainwater onto the marble entrance floor. Bellamy House's manager straightened instantly. "Mr. Holloway." Claire froze the moment she heard the name. Ethan noticed immediately. Daniel Holloway crossed the dining room with quick, impatient steps, silver hair damp from rain, leather gloves still on his hands. Corporate attorney. Chairman's private counsel for over 30 years. Ethan recognized him instantly. Daniel. Ethan frowned. What are you doing here this late? Daniel barely acknowledged him. His eyes locked directly onto Claire. Miss Whitmore. Claire's expression changed carefully back into professionalism. Good evening. Daniel removed one glove slowly. Chairman Calloway asked me to deliver something personally. Ethan's confusion deepened. Grandfather sent you? Daniel reached into his coat and removed a small brass key attached to a faded blue ribbon. He placed it gently onto the counter in front of Claire. He said you would understand. Claire stared at the key without touching it. Her breathing slowed almost imperceptibly. Ethan looked between them both. Understand what? Daniel hesitated. For the first time since entering, the attorney looked uncomfortable. There is a piano room upstairs, he said quietly. Chairman Calloway asked for it to be opened tonight. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Tiny. Controlled. Ethan frowned harder now. The piano room has been locked for years. Daniel nodded once. Yes. Why would he want it open now? Daniel looked toward Claire before answering. Because some rooms are not meant to stay silent forever. The old attorney turned toward Claire again. He is waiting. Ethan stared at him. Waiting where? Upstairs. Something cold moved slowly through Ethan's chest then. Not fear exactly. Instinct. The kind that warned powerful men when information was moving around them without permission. Claire finally picked up the brass key from the counter. Her fingers trembled this time. Barely, but enough for Ethan to notice. She slipped the key carefully into her coat pocket beside the envelope and looked toward the staircase leading to Bellamy House's abandoned upper floor. I should not go up there, she whispered softly. Daniel's expression gentled. He said you would say that. Claire looked suddenly younger standing beneath the dim restaurant lights. Less like a composed waitress. More like someone carrying years she never asked to inherit. Ethan stepped forward instinctively. Claire. She turned toward him. What is upstairs? For the first time all night, Claire's calm almost cracked. Not completely. Just enough for sadness to slip through. The last place my mother was truly happy. Then she walked toward the staircase, slowly while rain continued tapping against the windows of Bellamy House, like impatient fingers waiting for the past to answer. The staircase to the upper floor of Bellamy House had not been used regularly in years. Dust rested along the dark wooden railings like quiet evidence of forgotten time, and the farther Claire climbed, the softer the noise of Manhattan became beneath her feet. The restaurant below faded into distant murmurs and muted piano jazz, while rain continued brushing against the building's old windows like fingers searching for memories inside the glass. Claire held the brass key tightly in one hand as she reached the second-floor landing. Ethan followed several steps behind without speaking. He told himself he was only making sure his grandfather was all right. But deep down, he knew curiosity was pulling harder than concern now. Daniel Holloway remained downstairs, standing motionless near the staircase with the patience of a man who had already seen how this night would unfold. At the end of the hallway upstairs stood a single black door beneath a tarnished brass plaque that read Private Music Room. Claire stopped walking. Ethan noticed the slight rise and fall of her shoulders. Nervous. For the first time since meeting her, she actually looked nervous. Claire, Ethan said quietly. She did not turn around. You should not be here. Neither should you apparently. A faint sad smile touched her lips before disappearing again. That room belonged to another version of this building. Ethan glanced around the dim hallway lined with faded oil paintings and old chandeliers that no longer worked. And what version was that? Claire finally looked at him then. The human one. Before Ethan could answer, she inserted the brass key into the lock. The mechanism clicked softly. Old. Heavy. Final. Claire pushed the door open slowly. Warm air carrying the scent of cedarwood and old paper drifted out immediately. The room beyond looked untouched by time. A black Steinway grand piano sat near tall rain-covered windows overlooking Manhattan. Shelves filled with sheet music lined the walls. A small lamp glowed beside a leather chair where William Calloway sat alone beneath dim amber light. He looked tired now, not like the chairman people feared in boardrooms or admired on magazine covers. Just old. Ethan had not seen his grandfather look old before tonight. William lifted his eyes toward Claire first. Not Ethan. Never Ethan. You came. Claire stepped inside carefully. You asked me to. William nodded slowly. then glanced toward the piano. It still sounds the same. Claire swallowed quietly. Ethan remained near the doorway, watching the strange tenderness filling the room like invisible smoke. "Grandfather," he said carefully, "what exactly is happening?" William ignored the question completely. Instead, he looked toward Claire again. "Your mother used to sit right there." He pointed toward the piano bench. Every Thursday after closing, Claire walked closer to the instrument slowly, fingertips brushing across the polished black surface. "She told me she cleaned offices here once." William smiled faintly. "That is what she wanted people to believe." Ethan frowned immediately. "What does that mean?" William leaned back carefully in the leather chair, breathing slightly heavier now. "Your mother was not staff, Claire." Claire froze beside the piano. "What?" William's tired eyes softened. "Margaret Whitmore was a scholarship student at Juilliard, one of the finest pianists I had ever heard." Silence settled heavily across the room. Rain against glass. Distant thunder somewhere over the Hudson River. Claire stared at him without speaking. Ethan could almost see years of assumptions shifting behind her eyes. "No," Claire whispered softly. "My mother never even talks about music anymore." William nodded sadly. "Because she stopped playing after your father died." Claire's face lost color instantly. Ethan straightened near the doorway. "You knew her husband too?" William looked down briefly at his trembling hands. "Very well." The room became still again. Ethan could feel pieces moving around him now. Invisible connections forming beneath conversations he did not understand yet. Claire slowly sat down at the piano bench as if her knees no longer trusted the floor. "My mother told me nobody helped us after he died," she whispered. "She said we disappeared." William closed his eyes for one painful second. "You did?" Ethan stared at his grandfather. "Then how do you know all this?" William opened his eyes again and looked directly at Claire. "Because I was the reason your mother disappeared." Ethan's heartbeat slowed strangely inside his chest. Claire looked stunned but controlled, the way people looked when the truth hurt too quietly to scream. William reached toward the small table beside him and picked up an old photograph. His fingers shook as he handed it to Claire. She stared down immediately. A younger William stood beside a grand piano inside Bellamy House nearly 30 years earlier. Next to him smiled a beautiful blonde woman holding sheet music against her chest. Margaret Whitmore, Claire's mother. Young, elegant, alive in a way Claire had never seen before. On the back of the photograph, written in faded blue ink, were 4 simple words. "Thank you for saving him." Ethan stepped closer instinctively. "Saving who?" William looked slowly toward his grandson then. And for the first time all night, there was guilt in the old man's eyes. Deep, heavy, human. "Your father." The room went silent enough to hear rainwater sliding down the windows. The storm over Manhattan grew heavier after midnight, turning the city outside Bellamy House into blurred silver and black beneath the rain. Inside the old piano room, nobody moved for several long seconds after William Calloway spoke those final 2 words. "Your father." Ethan stared at his grandfather as if the sentence itself had arrived from another language. Claire remained seated at the piano bench, the old photograph still trembling slightly between her fingers. Somewhere below them, the restaurant doors opened and closed again. Distant voices drifted upward and disappeared. But inside the music room, time felt suspended. Ethan stepped forward first. "What do you mean she saved my father?" William leaned back slowly in the leather chair, exhaustion pressing visibly against his shoulders now. 23 years ago, he said quietly, "your father almost destroyed this family." Ethan frowned immediately. "My father died in a car accident." "That was later." William's eyes remained fixed on the rain-covered windows. "Long before that, Jonathan Calloway was reckless. Gambling, drinking, terrible investments. He buried himself in debt, trying to prove he deserved the company." Ethan's jaw tightened. His father's mistakes were never discussed publicly. Calloway's did not preserve scandals. They buried them beneath stock prices and polished magazine interviews. William continued softly. "One night, Jonathan came here after everyone left. He was desperate, angry, ashamed. He had just lost more money than most people make in 10 lifetimes." Claire listened silently, fingers resting against the piano keys without pressing them. "Your mother was upstairs practicing alone," William said. "She found him sitting exactly where you are now." Ethan glanced toward the piano bench instinctively. "And?" William's expression darkened with memory. "And she talked him out of disappearing forever." Silence again. Quiet. Heavy. Ethan slowly understood what his grandfather was refusing to say directly. Claire lowered her eyes. My mother never mentioned any of this. Because Jonathan begged her not to. William folded his hands together carefully. Your mother protected his dignity when he had none left to protect himself with. Ethan looked toward Claire, now differently than before. Not curiosity anymore. Something more unsettled. Because the woman standing quietly beside the piano suddenly carried a piece of his family's hidden history. William reached slowly into his coat pocket and removed a second envelope. Smaller this time. Worn at the edges. Jonathan wrote this 3 months later. He handed it toward Claire. He wanted your mother to have it if anything ever happened to him. Claire hesitated before taking the envelope carefully. The paper looked old enough to break apart. Ethan stared at it immediately. You kept that all these years? William nodded once. Some debts cannot be paid with money. Claire opened the envelope slowly. Inside rested a single folded page written in dark blue ink. Her eyes moved across the words silently at first. Then her breathing changed. Tiny. Fragile. Ethan watched her carefully. What does it say? Claire swallowed before answering softly. He thanked her. William lowered his eyes. Read the last line. Claire hesitated, then quietly read aloud. You reminded me that a man is still worth saving even after he stops believing it himself. Ethan looked away toward the rain immediately. Something inside his chest tightened unexpectedly. Because he had spent most of his life hearing stories about Jonathan Calloway the businessman. Never Jonathan, the broken man. Never Jonathan, the human being. Claire folded the letter carefully again. Why are you telling me this now? She asked softly. William's tired gaze lifted toward her. Because I made a mistake. The old chairman's voice weakened slightly. After Jonathan died, your mother disappeared from Bellamy House completely. I assumed she wanted distance from this family. Claire's eyes sharpened faintly. That is not what happened. William nodded slowly, regret crossing his face like shadow. No, it is not. Ethan looked between them both again. Then what happened? Claire stood from the piano bench quietly and walked toward the rain-covered windows before answering. Manhattan lights reflected faintly across her pale face. My mother came back here once, she said softly. After my father died. William closed his eyes briefly, like he already knew the rest. She asked for help. Ethan's heartbeat slowed. Help with what? Claire stared out at the city instead of him. Medical bills. Rent. Food. Her voice remained calm somehow. That almost made it worse. I was 4 years old. Ethan felt something cold settle heavily beneath his ribs. William spoke barely above a whisper now. I never knew she came. Claire finally turned around. Your board members turned her away downstairs before she could reach you. William looked devastated for the first time all night. Not powerful. Not wealthy. Just old and painfully human. Who? He asked quietly. Claire shook her head once. It does not matter anymore. But Ethan already knew something dangerous had entered the room. Shame. Real shame. The kind money could not negotiate away. William suddenly coughed hard into a handkerchief, his body folding slightly forward. Claire moved instinctively toward him first. Faster than Ethan did. Mr. Calloway? William steadied himself weakly. I am fine. But he was not fine. Ethan could see it now clearly beneath the dim amber light. His grandfather looked thinner than last month. Slower. Tired in ways expensive doctors could not fully hide anymore. Claire poured water carefully from the crystal pitcher beside the piano and handed him the glass gently. William accepted it with shaking fingers. Thank you. Claire said nothing. Ethan watched the interaction silently. The old chairman looked at Claire with trust, familiarity, almost affection. And Claire, despite everything she had just learned, still moved toward weakness instead of away from it. William drank slowly before whispering something so quietly Ethan almost missed it. You have your mother's heart. Claire lowered her eyes immediately. She would disagree. William smiled sadly into the rain-dark room. Only because kind people rarely recognize themselves clearly. By 1:15 in the morning, the storm outside had swallowed most of Manhattan in silver fog and blurred headlights. Bellamy House stood almost completely silent now, its lower dining hall dark except for a few amber wall lamps left glowing near the entrance. Upstairs, the old piano room felt separated from the rest of the world entirely, as though time itself had slowed beneath the soft light and falling rain. William Calloway sat quietly near the windows, one hand resting against the arm of the leather chair, while Claire stood beside the piano holding the old photograph against her chest. Ethan remained near the bookshelf, watching both of them carefully. Nothing about tonight made sense anymore. The waitress he dismissed hours earlier somehow carried pieces of his family history nobody had ever spoken aloud. Worse than that, his grandfather trusted her. Deeply, more deeply than Ethan understood. William finally broke the silence first. "There is one more thing your mother never told you." Claire looked toward him immediately. "What?" William's tired eyes moved slowly across the room before settling on the rain-dark windows again. "After she was turned away from this building, I found out 2 weeks later." Claire's fingers tightened around the photograph. "And?" William swallowed quietly. "I went looking for her." Ethan frowned. "You never told anyone this." "Because I was ashamed." The old man's voice cracked slightly beneath the weight of the confession. "By the time I found her apartment, she had already sold almost everything she owned." Claire lowered her eyes slowly. William continued softly. "The piano was gone. Her wedding ring was gone. Even her sheet music." Rain tapped gently against the windows. Slow. Steady. Claire could almost picture it now. Her mother alone in a tiny apartment trying to survive quietly while pride and grief slowly emptied the room around her. "She refused to take money from me," William whispered. "She said kindness offered too late can feel like humiliation." Ethan looked toward Claire instinctively, expecting anger. But Claire only stood there silently. Calm. That somehow hurt more to witness. William reached toward the side table again and picked up another object Ethan had not noticed before. A faded blue music book worn soft along the edges. This was the only thing she accepted. Claire stepped closer carefully. Her breath caught immediately when she saw the title embossed in gold letters across the cover. Chopin Nocturnes. "My mother still has this," she whispered. William smiled faintly. "I know." Ethan stared at them both. "You stayed in contact all these years?" "No." Claire answered quietly before William could speak. "Not directly." William nodded once. "Your mother never wanted charity, but she allowed me to help anonymously." Ethan's expression hardened slightly. "Help how?" William looked at him calmly. "Scholarships, rent assistance, medical bills after Claire broke her wrist at 12. Claire looked startled. "That was you." William smiled gently. "Your mother thought it came from a community arts foundation." Ethan felt something shift uncomfortably inside his chest again. "So all these years, William interrupted softly. "Your family owed far more to hers than anyone realized." Silence filled the room again. Ethan looked toward Claire differently now. Not as a waitress. Not as some random employee caught accidentally inside Callaway history. She was connected to all of this long before tonight began. Claire carefully opened the blue music book. Between 2 pages rested a small folded paper, yellowed by time. She pulled it out slowly. A child's drawing. Crayons faded. A little girl beside a piano holding hands with a taller woman beneath crooked stars. Claire stared at it without breathing. "I drew this," she whispered. William nodded. "You were 6. Ethan blinked immediately. "You met her when she was a child?" "Twice," William said quietly. "Both times she brought this drawing because she wanted to show me she was learning music too." Claire's eyes filled slightly, but no tears fell. "I barely remember that." William's smile carried unbearable sadness now. "I remember everything." Ethan looked away for a second, because suddenly the room no longer felt built around wealth or power or inheritance. It felt built around memory, around guilt, around the quiet ways people fail each other while pretending they are too important to notice. William suddenly coughed again, harder this time. Claire moved immediately beside him, kneeling slightly near the chair. "You should be resting." William shook his head faintly. "Not yet." His breathing sounded thinner now. "Older." Ethan stepped closer too. "Grandfather, you need to call your doctor." William looked at him carefully for several long seconds before speaking. "Doctors cannot repair unfinished things, Ethan." The room fell still again. Then William slowly reached into his coat pocket and removed a small silver key attached to a dark leather tag. Different from the brass piano key downstairs. This one looked newer. More important somehow. He held it toward Claire. "There is a private safety deposit box at Callaway Trust Bank." Claire frowned slightly. "Why are you giving me this?" William's eyes softened immediately. "Because there are documents inside that belong to your family." Ethan stiffened beside them. "What documents?" William looked toward his grandson then. Calm. Certain. "The truth." Ethan felt the word land harder than it should have. Claire stared down at the silver key without touching it. Mr. Calloway, William interrupted gently. You deserve to know what was taken from your mother. Outside the windows, thunder rolled softly across the city while the old chairman sat beneath the dim piano room light looking less like the head of a billion-dollar empire and more like a man racing quietly against time. Nearly 2 in the morning, Bellamy House had become completely still. The last employees downstairs finished closing duties quietly beneath dim hallway lights, while rain continued sweeping across Manhattan in silver waves. Upstairs, the old piano room carried the fragile silence of a place holding too many unfinished truths at once. Claire Whitmore stood near the windows with the silver key resting cold inside her palm. Ethan remained several feet away beside the bookshelf, unable to stop watching her. The woman he dismissed as unimportant only hours ago now stood at the center of conversations his own family had hidden for decades. William Calloway leaned back carefully in the leather chair, exhaustion carving deeper lines into his face with every passing minute. Yet his eyes remained strangely peaceful now, as though speaking the truth aloud had finally loosened something heavy inside him. Claire turned toward him slowly. What exactly is inside the deposit box? William looked toward the piano before answering. Documents. Letters. Ownership records. Ethan frowned immediately. Ownership of what? William's gaze shifted calmly toward his grandson. Bellamy House. The room went silent again. Ethan stared at him. That is impossible. William shook his head faintly. No, it is inconvenient. Claire blinked in confusion. I do not understand. William folded his trembling hands together. 31 years ago, Bellamy House was close to bankruptcy. Quietly, publicly, the Calloway name looked untouchable. Privately, we were collapsing. Ethan's expression tightened. I have never seen any record of that. Because I erased them. William's voice remained calm. Your father wanted risky expansion deals. Investors panicked. Creditors circled the building like vultures. Claire listened silently beside the rain-dark windows while William continued. Margaret Whitmore's father owned this property originally. Claire froze completely. Ethan straightened immediately. What? William nodded slowly. The Whitmore family built Bellamy House in 1948. Ethan shook his head in disbelief. That is not possible. The Calloways have owned this place for generations. That is the version printed in magazines, William replied quietly. Not the truth. Claire's fingers tightened around the silver key again. My grandfather owned this building? William smiled sadly. Until he lost everything after the recession. Claire stared at him speechlessly. The old chairman continued softly. Your mother sold her inheritance rights to save Bellamy House from foreclosure. Quietly, without asking for recognition. Ethan felt something shift sharply beneath his ribs. You are telling me her family saved this company? More than once. William's answer landed heavily in the room. Claire lowered her eyes slowly, trying to process decades of silence rearranging themselves around her in real time. My mother worked double shifts at a grocery store, she whispered. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. William closed his eyes briefly. Because she gave away everything before anyone knew what she sacrificed. Ethan looked toward the rain-covered windows now instead of either of them. He had spent his entire life inside a legacy built on certainty. Calloway wealth. Calloway power. Calloway ownership. But tonight, every foundation beneath those stories felt unstable. Claire suddenly looked toward William carefully. Why would my mother hide this from me? William opened his eyes again. Because dignity mattered more to her than revenge. The room fell quiet enough to hear the soft ticking of the antique clock near the piano. Ethan looked at Claire again differently now. Not with curiosity. Not even guilt. Respect. Real respect. Claire slipped the silver key slowly into her coat pocket beside the old photograph and folded letter. Why are you telling me all this tonight? William's expression changed faintly then. Older somehow. More fragile. Because tomorrow morning my lawyers finalize the revisions to my estate. Ethan frowned immediately. Revisions? William looked toward his grandson calmly. I am changing my will. The air inside the room seemed to still completely. Ethan stared at him. Changing it how? William did not answer right away. Instead, he looked toward Claire with the quiet certainty of someone finally correcting an old mistake. Bellamy House was never supposed to belong to men who only understood power. Ethan felt tension rise immediately beneath his calm expression. Grandfather. William lifted one tired hand gently. Listen before you judge. Ethan fell silent again. Claire looked deeply uncomfortable now. Mr. Calloway, I do not want any part of family conflict. William smiled faintly. That is precisely why you deserve more than most people in this family. Ethan looked away sharply. The words hit harder than he expected. William coughed softly again, weaker this time. Claire instinctively moved toward him with a glass of water before he even asked. Ethan noticed that too. She kept choosing kindness even after learning what had been taken from her family. Most people would have chosen bitterness by now. William accepted the water carefully. Thank you, Claire. She nodded once without speaking. The old chairman studied her quietly for a long moment before whispering something that made Ethan's chest tighten unexpectedly. Your mother once told me the strongest people are usually the quietest because they have nothing left to prove. Claire lowered her eyes immediately. She says things like that when she cannot sleep. William smiled softly. That means she still remembers who she is. Rain rolled harder against the windows then, thunder murmuring somewhere far across the city, while the old piano room held 3 people standing inside, truths too large to fit comfortably into one night. Ethan looked toward Claire one more time and realized something unsettling. The woman carrying trays downstairs understood honor better than most executives sitting inside his boardrooms. At 2:40 in the morning, the storm finally began to weaken over Manhattan, but inside Bellamy House the air still carried the quiet pressure of things changing permanently. Rain slid slower across the tall piano room windows now, leaving silver trails beneath the city lights, while the antique clock near the bookshelf ticked steadily through the silence. Claire Whitmore stood beside the grand piano holding the old photograph, the folded letter, and the silver key inside her coat pocket like pieces of a life she never knew belonged to her family. Ethan remained near the fireplace, his thoughts moving in directions he could no longer fully control. Every certainty he grew up believing suddenly felt smaller tonight. William Calloway looked exhausted now, more exhausted than either of them wanted to admit aloud. The old chairman slowly removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes before speaking again. There is something both of you need to understand. Claire looked toward him quietly. Ethan straightened slightly. William rested his gaze on the piano keys for a long moment before continuing. Money changes the way people hear the truth. Silence settled gently around the room. Poor people speak, William said softly, and the world asks for proof. Rich people whisper, and everyone calls it wisdom. Ethan lowered his eyes slightly at that. Because deep down, he knew it was true. William looked toward Claire. Your mother understood something this family forgot a long time ago. Claire swallowed quietly. What was that? William smiled faintly. That dignity is not something you buy after success. It is what you keep before success arrives. The room grew still again. Claire's fingers brushed lightly across the edge of the piano bench, while thunder rumbled faintly somewhere far downtown. Ethan finally stepped closer. Grandfather, if all of this is true, why did you wait this long? William looked at him carefully. Because I spent too many years protecting the wrong things. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. You protected the company. No, William answered softly. I protected pride. The words landed heavily between them. Claire looked toward Ethan instinctively, then away again. William continued quietly. I convinced myself that preserving the Calloway image mattered more than correcting old injustices. His tired eyes drifted toward the rain-dark windows. That is the danger of wealth, Ethan. After enough years, people stop asking whether something is right and only ask whether it looks right. Ethan said nothing, because he recognized pieces of himself inside that sentence. William reached slowly toward the small table beside his chair again and picked up a thin black folder tied with dark ribbon. Inside this folder are revised ownership agreements for Bellamy House. Claire immediately shook her head. No, William looked unsurprised. You have not even opened it yet. I do not want ownership of anything. Claire's voice remained calm but firm. My mother never asked for revenge, and neither will I. William smiled sadly. That is exactly why you deserve fairness. Ethan watched Claire carefully. No greed crossed her face. No excitement. Most people would already be calculating numbers, properties, influence. Claire only looked uncomfortable, almost burdened. William extended the folder toward her slowly. Take it. Claire hesitated for several long seconds before finally accepting it carefully with both hands. The old chairman's expression softened immediately, relief passing briefly across his face, like someone finally setting down a weight carried too long. Ethan stared at the black folder quietly. Does the board know about this? William gave a tired laugh beneath his breath. The board barely remembers where Bellamy House came from. Then his face turned serious again. Tomorrow morning they will. Ethan looked toward Claire. And what are you planning to do with it? Claire lowered her eyes toward the folder. Nothing. Ethan frowned slightly. Nothing. I did not come here for money. Her voice stayed soft. Honest. I came to work my shift. The simplicity of the answer filled the room heavier than any dramatic speech could have. William looked deeply moved for a moment. Your mother would be proud of you. Claire blinked quickly and looked away toward the windows before emotion could fully reach her face. Outside, the rain had almost stopped completely now. Manhattan lights reflected across the wet streets below like scattered gold beneath the darkness. William suddenly coughed again, longer this time. Ethan moved immediately beside him. Grandfather. William lifted one hand weakly. I am all right. But his breathing sounded thinner now. Claire poured fresh water into the crystal glass and handed it to him without speaking. Their fingers touched briefly. William looked up at her with quiet gratitude. You always notice when people are struggling, he whispered. Claire offered the faintest smile. That usually happens to people who spent years struggling themselves. Ethan looked at her differently after that sentence. Not with pity. Respect. Real respect. The kind earned slowly. William drank a small sip of water before looking toward his grandson one final time. Ethan. Yes. The old chairman's eyes sharpened gently despite the exhaustion wearing through him. Do not mistake composure for weakness again. Ethan glanced toward Claire instinctively. William noticed. People like Claire survive things powerful men could never endure quietly. Ethan felt heat rise faintly behind his collar. Because hours earlier he had looked directly at her and called her invisible. Claire lowered her gaze modestly, as if she had not heard the comment at all. But somehow that only made Ethan feel worse. William leaned back into the chair slowly, eyes drifting closed for just a second before reopening again. There is one final document in that folder, he whispered toward Claire. A letter addressed to you. Claire looked down immediately. From who? William's tired smile returned softly. Your mother. The room fell silent once more while the storm outside finally disappeared into the sleeping city beyond the windows. The city looked different just before dawn. Manhattan no longer felt loud or untouchable beneath the fading storm. The streets below Bellamy House shimmered with rainwater and blurred reflections, while pale blue light slowly pushed against the darkness beyond the windows. Inside the old piano room, silence rested gently over everything now. The antique clock ticked past 4 in the morning. The storm had ended, but none of their lives would return to what they had been before tonight. Claire Whitmore stood near the grand piano holding the black folder against her chest. Inside rested documents connected to her family, hidden truths buried for decades, and a letter written by her mother in handwriting she recognized instantly. She had not opened it yet. Somehow the envelope felt heavier than ownership papers or inheritance ever could. Ethan Calloway remained near the fireplace, his suit jacket folded over one arm now, exhaustion softening the sharp edges of his expression. Across from them, William Calloway sat quietly in the leather chair beneath the amber lamp, looking smaller than the powerful chairman who entered Bellamy House hours earlier, yet strangely lighter too, as though confession itself had given him room to breathe again. Claire finally looked down at the envelope and opened it carefully. The paper inside unfolded softly beneath trembling fingers. Ethan watched her face while she began reading silently. At first her expression remained composed. Then something changed behind her eyes. Not shock, not sadness, recognition, the kind that arrives when love survives longer than silence. William lowered his eyes respectfully while Claire continued reading. After several seconds, she whispered softly, almost to herself. She knew. Ethan frowned slightly. Knew what? Claire swallowed carefully before looking up from the letter. That Mr. Calloway had been helping us anonymously all those years. William closed his eyes briefly. Claire looked back down at the page again. She wrote that she never exposed the truth because she did not want me growing up believing wealthy people owed us something. The room fell still again. Claire's voice remained soft but steady as she continued reading aloud. She said character built in bitterness eventually poisons kindness. Ethan slowly lowered his eyes, because somehow those words felt directed toward him too. Claire reached the final paragraph and stopped breathing for just a second before quietly reading the last lines aloud. If you ever learn the truth about Bellamy House, promise me one thing. Do not measure your worth by what was taken from us. Measure it by what we remained despite losing it. Silence settled deeply into the room after that. William looked toward the windows, blinking slowly against emotion he no longer bothered hiding completely. Ethan stared at Claire differently now than at any other moment that night. She stood there holding proof that her family had been erased quietly from their own legacy, yet no anger lived in her voice. No greed, no revenge, only dignity. Claire folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. Then she looked toward William. Why give this back now? William's tired eyes met hers gently. Because I am running out of time to correct old mistakes. Ethan immediately looked toward his grandfather. Do not say that. William smiled faintly. Age eventually says it for us anyway. The old chairman slowly pushed himself upright from the leather chair with visible effort. Claire instinctively stepped forward to help steady him. William accepted her arm quietly. Ethan noticed the way his grandfather relaxed immediately beside her presence. Trust. Real trust. William looked toward the piano one final time. Your mother once played here until sunrise, he whispered softly. The entire building used to stop breathing when she touched those keys. Claire glanced toward the piano bench quietly. She has not played in years. William nodded sadly. Some people stop loving the thing that reminds them what they lost. Ethan looked between them both before finally speaking carefully. Claire. She turned toward him. His voice softened in a way she had not heard before tonight. I owe you an apology. Claire blinked slightly, surprised. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly before continuing. I judged you the second I saw your uniform. The room stayed quiet. Ethan gave a small, humorless smile beneath his exhaustion. Turns out you belonged here long before I did. Claire studied him for a moment, then quietly answered. People become dangerous when they think dignity belongs only to certain zip codes. Ethan almost smiled despite himself, because she was right. Again, William watched both of them carefully beneath the dim morning light, now slipping through the rain-cleared windows. Something peaceful crossed his tired expression. Perhaps there is hope for this family after all, he murmured softly. Claire looked toward the city outside one final time before reaching slowly into the black folder. She removed the revised ownership papers and handed them back toward William. Ethan frowned immediately. Claire. But she shook her head gently. My mother did not survive all those years, so I could spend my life fighting over buildings. William looked stunned. You are refusing ownership? Claire smiled faintly. Tired. Honest. I spent years carrying trays for strangers who thought money made them important. Her eyes drifted toward the piano quietly. I do not want to become one of them. Ethan stared at her speechlessly. William's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the documents back. Then what do you want? Claire looked toward the old chairman with calm certainty. I want my mother's name remembered correctly. Silence filled the piano room one final time. Soft. Lasting. Outside, dawn finally broke over Manhattan, painting the wet streets gold beneath the morning light, while inside Bellamy House, the waitress nobody noticed walked away carrying nothing except the truth, and somehow leaving everyone else feeling smaller without her.